Hey guys, this is Zach with Next Tech News, and just yesterday AMD finally released some information about Threadripper. Let's dive into it. So yesterday AMD announced two processors, the pricing of those processors, when they were going to be available to the general public, and what the core clocks were. The two processors they announced yesterday were the 1920X and the 1950X. The 1950X is the flagship 16-core, 32-thread processor that we heard about in probably like a month ago. And the 1920X is the 12-core, 24-thread processor. The 1950X has a price tag of $999, which puts it in extreme competition with Intel's lineup, because right now Intel's 16-core processor is $1,699, and Intel's i9 flagship is $2,000. So depending on which processor you want to really pin AMD's flagship up against, it's about $700 cheaper or $1,000 cheaper, which is a huge difference. The X399 platform period will be a whole lineup of cheaper processors compared to the X299 platform. The 1920X, on the other hand, is competing more with the i9 7900X, which is a 10-core processor, and the 1920X is a 12-core processor. So similar, but not exactly the same. The pricing of the 1920X is $799, which again puts it at a big difference between that and the $1,000 7900X. A $300 difference is no joke, and I'm very glad to see that AMD is finally starting to be competitive with Intel, because this can only help us all out. Competition is always a good thing, and it's best for us, the consumer. Companies like Intel and AMD don't like it as much, but guess what? For us as the consumer, it is the best thing to have healthy competition, because it means that we get the most innovation in the cheapest prices. Looking at the core clocks of both the 1950X and the 1920X, they're very similar since they are just bump ups from the Ryzen 7 platform. They're basically two dies connected together through the Infinity fabric. So they're very similar to core clock speed of something like an 1800X. The 1950X is a 3.4 GHz base clock with a 4 GHz boost clock. And then the 1920X is a 3.5 GHz base clock with another 4 GHz boost clock. Obviously clock speed is still a slight bit lower than Intel's, but you definitely get the benefit of just flat out more cores with AMD, especially for the price. In AMD's live stream, they also released Cinebench scores for both the 1920X and the 1950X, comparing it to the top of the line i9 7900X, which is Intel's best offering at the current moment, which is again a 10-core 20-thread processor. The Cinebench scores ended up being 2431 CB for the 1920X and 2167 for the 7900X from Intel. I have seen Intel's 7900X perform slightly better than this in other scenarios, but again with Cinebench, your scores can vary up and down every time you test it. So what we really should be basing it off of is more of an average and not just a single run. I always take manufacturers' testing with a grain of salt, especially if AMD is testing an Intel product. We don't know what kind of cooling was on that processor or anything like that, so I definitely would take theirs with a grain of salt, because like I said, I've seen that i9 7900X perform identically to the 1920X that is coming out soon. The 1950X, on the other hand, performed extremely admirably with probably one of the highest Cinebench scores I've ever seen of 3062 CB. Just to put that in some context, my computer right here is running an i7 6850K, and the highest I've ever scored is a 1381, and that's overclocked. So I'm really excited for this Threadripper lineup, because all it does is it creates healthy competition, especially against the X299 platform, and AMD especially has not really been in this space in a very long time. So me being an extreme enthusiast as far as video editing and content creation, am very much looking forward to Threadripper, and I'm going to try to get at least the 1920X into here for some testing for you guys, and possibly the 1950X. We'll see how much money I have waiting for it. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to afford the 1950X when it is released, but I will definitely try to get some of that testing here on the channel for you guys. The other thing AMD announced yesterday that was very interesting was that Threadripper will be released sometime in August right now. There's no firm date, but they said it will be released during the month of August. And if you're a big fan of pre-built system, which most of you on this channel probably aren't, the Dell Alienware pre-orders for their Threadripper lineup, since they have the exclusive of Threadripper, is going to be released. The pre-orders start on July 27th, which is what a lot of us heard was the release date of Threadripper, but it's actually the pre-order date of the Alienware lineup of Threadripper computers, all those pre-built systems and everything. So I hope you guys found this information interesting. I certainly found this information interesting because I'm very interested in using something like a Threadripper processor because of my content creation here. The benefits you get from a 16-core, 32-thread processor are only going to be able to be seen for content creators, to be quite honest, or graphic designers and stuff like that. People who use the Adobe suite and CAD software and stuff like that, which is basically what more than 50% of this computer consists of, because half the time I am doing content creation and the other half of the time I do a little bit of gaming. I'm more of a casual gamer, but what I'm trying to say is that the Threadripper lineup is definitely not a gamer's lineup at all. I mean, you're basically going to see the exact same performance as a Ryzen 7 processor in the Threadripper lineup for gaming performance, and that's just because of the way their Infinity Fabric and the double die scenarios work with AMD's technology. When you're doubling it up like that, you're bumping up how many cores you have and threads, but you're not changing anything with the clock speeds. And most games today only use about 4 cores at the most. Some use a little bit more than that. Some games are a little bit more CPU intensive, where they do use more than 4 cores, but it's extremely, extremely rare. And games primarily care about core clock, and that's why I definitely don't recommend Threadripper at all to anyone looking for a gaming processor. And honestly, no one's gonna choose an X299 platform for gaming either. That's not what they're meant for. They're meant for heavy workload applications. And really, the reason why you see people excited about AMD Threadripper is not because they're AMD fanboys or Intel fanboys or whatever. It's just because they're excited to see healthy competition in this marketplace, because again, that just benefits all of us. And that's what I'm excited for with AMD Threadripper, because I might be able to get a much cheaper CPU with almost the same performance, maybe not quite the same, but almost the same, for a lot cheaper. And that's what I'm excited for. Let me know what you guys are excited for. If you like AMD Threadripper, if you like Ryzen 7 and all that, let me know in the comments below. I personally am extremely excited about all of it, because I hope it pushes Intel in the right direction as far as price and innovation is concerned. And then it'll push back on AMD, and it can be this fight back and forth, which can only benefit us. I hope you guys liked this video. This is Zach with Next Tech News. See ya!